Hi, thank you for joining us, and thank you for the introduction, Grace. So this is a panel discussing the future of psychedelics in the EU. Obviously, Europe's history with psychedelics goes back quite far, but we've seen a lot of censorship for a long time, 50 years, but people are now starting to take notice, especially policymakers in Europe. So my first question to the panel today, to give a bit of context, what do you feel is the current sentiment around psychedelics in Europe, and are we seeing people warming to them?
Who should start?
Yeah.
Well, I think that, first of all, thank you for having us here. The reality of the outlook of psychedelics in Europe is changing, as it is changing in the rest of the world. It was a big taboo till a few, I would say, even months ago, to discuss in certain circles psychedelics as treatment for mental health care, for instance. However, this is changing. And it is changing because there are clinical trials going on. There's a lot of scientific evidence, and people who are rational and discuss things according to what science is saying. Having a science-based approach leads people to actually change their views and maybe start taking interest in it. And I think the fact that people start taking interest in it and they are ready to actually discuss, that is the first step towards more acceptance. And I think we're at that stage at the moment. It's like opening a whole new chapter, and people are now interested in this new book with this new chapter.
Yes, so thank you for having us. I may only confirm what Cyrus previously mentioned. I mean, the reality as we see it now is that clearly there are clinical trials that show us the path would work. Still, in order to implement it fully, we certainly need way more tests, and we certainly need to convince the legislators to actually simplify the administrative restrictions that are currently existing. There is some appetite to talk about it. Even very senior members of the scientific community currently express their position to kind of be in favor of the research. The problem is now really a bit more political, because clearly when you bring the idea to the table, still a lot of people are somehow afraid, having prejudices and so on. So we are now discussing that. I would say we have got over the, let's say, critical threshold. So certainly, at least in some parties, if you bring it to the table, the party is able to actually make a common decision to say yes, we support it. I mean, we in the European Party, we are able to say by majority we are in favor of the research of psychedelics. I mean, this is possible to pass, and there will be majority of the votes so far within the party. Now the discussion will have to go in order to be able to build the majority within the representative bodies like the parliament, which will be way more trickier, but at least we have starting positions so that we can kind of approach the colleagues and try to convince them to really get better view. And I may only say from my own experience, when you talk to the people who are no longer previously not interested in the issue, and you describe them what is the situation, how it works, and how it could help, they are actually way more open, and you don't need that much time. It's just really slight touch, and a lot of people change their sides, because I mean they are aware of what is the alternative. They are aware of the problems with antidepressants and what are the side effects. So they are willing to discuss alternatives.
Amazing, and to follow on from that, we've seen the launch of the cross-party group of MEPs calling on the EMA to take action on psychedelics, and they've now said they're going to hold a workshop on psychedelics this year. With groups like PAREA, what work is being done in European Parliament to advance therapies into healthcare systems?
Mm-hmm. So I want to start by acknowledging that, just coming back to the previous question, sentiments are changing, and we have here with us two members of the European Parliament, which probably was something unthinkable of some years ago. And I am aware that you're also taking certain political risks by supporting this field, so thank you for that. And one of the main activities that PAREA is doing at this point really is education, and I see education as a kind of a foundational enabler, because one of the main barriers to widespread access, and we heard this from previous presentations from FTI study, will still be this lingering cultural stigma, because we are confronting ourselves with decades of bad press and, of course, scheduling. So it's really important that we work towards wider societal acceptance and towards people seeing psychedelic therapies as valid, as effective treatment modalities, as real medicines. And this is one of the things that PAREA is doing. And yes, there is an education of policymakers, there is European Parliament, other EU institutions. What we do is send regular news releases. We based work on an assumption that if EU policymakers, if healthcare ministries, if research ministries don't hear about these things from us, it's likely that they will not hear about it at all. So we are kind of familiarizing them with this. But there is much more to our work than just addressing policymakers, because if we really want to think about access and meaningful integration of these therapies into healthcare systems, we have to win trust and broad engagement from healthcare professionals, from scientific communities. And this is something that PAREA pays a lot of attention to. And in a way, this thinking is kind of baked in and built in our structure. So PAREA is a membership-based organization. And yes, we have among our members psychedelic organizations like Beckley and so on, but we also have patient organizations, free EU-wide patient advocacy groups in the area of mental health, pain, neurology, and scientific societies, such as European Brain Council, Association of European Cancer Leagues, European Psychiatric Association, European College of Neuropsychopharmacology. So a lot of work has already been done, and a lot of support is already showing up through the fact that these communities agreed to join. And we are also continuing the education with other groups, such as I was a couple of months ago speaking at the Congress of the European Psychology Students Associations. In a few months, we have a panel during the European Pain Federation Congress, and it will be the first time when psychedelics are discussed within the pain community. So policy is important, but there is so much more than policy as well that we have to be addressing.
Let's answer as well.
What I would add to this is the fact that at the beginning of this mandate, when I was elected to the European Parliament, we started an alliance within Parliament, a mental health alliance with Mental Health Europe. And I remember in the first discussions we used to speak a lot on the need for a European mental health strategy, which still does not exist. However, all those involved in the mental health alliance, we used to discuss different therapies, different ways of how people who would be undergoing mental health challenges could actually be healed or come out of them. And the interesting thing is that while we used to speak between ourselves, thinking that others might not be open to hearing our views on psychedelics for mental health, we realized as time went by that there were many others who were actually receiving information, educational campaigns by PAREA and others, where you increase your knowledge of what there is at the moment, what scientific research is going on at the moment, and how this could help in our road towards helping people who literally need help to come out of, we speak a lot of people who have been taking antidepressants for 30 years, 35 years, and they are still in the same situation where they started. And that question led us to start discussing and debating what new methods there are in order to help these people. And obviously, now that even the European Union is moving towards more competence when it comes to the health sector, following the pandemic especially, there's this push towards a European Health Union, we wanted to make sure that mental health, first of all, is part of that European Health Union, but then that there is enough money also dedicated for research and development, even within the pharmaceutical strategy that has just come out, to finance more research into psychedelics for mental health, because the first studies that we were seeing showed that there were very good results, and therefore there's hope. And where there's hope, we should actually focus on that hope, finance that hope, and make it turn into a reality.
Yeah. Let's go.
Just maybe a few sentences to add urgency to Cyrus's words. I mean, when we started this term of the European Parliament, we had zero clue what will it be about. I mean, like through this last 4 years, we have faced the global pandemic that was never here before. And we are facing now the war in the Ukraine. And I mean, like, I could never imagine a situation that we have to be confined in our places without the opportunity to go out. I would never imagine to go sleeping like yesterday, hearing that actually there is a nuclear power plant in Europe being full of landmines. This is not really like improving mental health of anybody. And under the specific circumstances, I believe there is certainly a strong justification for further research, and it's not like a question we could kind of like postpone until ever, because those mental health issues that are being caused by the external conditions are very real and very much affecting people around us.
Yeah, certainly. And, you know, just to follow on from your comments then, you know, with the reform package that's been announced for pharmaceutical regulations, it's aiming to make medicine more affordable, more accessible to people across the EU, and to foster innovation. So with that package that's been negotiated, do you think that there's scope for psychedelics to be included in that?
Okay, I'll go first again. Yes, I think that. So what is the current situation? The current situation is that we have in the European Union one single market when it comes to all other products. However, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, medicine, we have 27 separate markets. And that does not make sense. It does not make sense for accessibility of pharmaceutical products for citizens, and also for their affordability, especially if, like me, you come from, well, I come from the smallest member state. And it's an island, so Malta. So in that case, it's very difficult to have access to a number of medicines, and when you have access to them, they're at a higher price. So that is something that is being addressed in this pharmaceutical strategy. However, what we wanted to see, and I think we're seeing it also addressed in the strategy, is the fact that there are many unmet needs, and those unmet needs must be addressed as soon as possible by the European Union. And I would say that the use of psychedelics in mental health care, I think there was an unmet need, because what currently has been happening to those people in need of treatment or care have always been given the same kind of medicines with no or very little results. Therefore, I would say, and we should classify such challenges having unmet needs so far. And I think that is where we need to go now. I think that we need to say that so far the needs of mental health patients in certain circumstances have unmet needs, and therefore we need to focus also on the pharmaceutical strategy on psychedelics in this case. Apart from that, we need, and this is something that we're seeing in the pharmaceutical strategy, a big push towards more investment in research and development. Europe should be at the forefront of innovation. It should be at the forefront of research and development, and unfortunately, currently it is not. And we really need to change that. Both my group and the group that Mikula comes from, I'm from the Socialists in the European Parliament, we're pushing to have much more investment in research and development. Europe must become once again the home of innovation. And we need to push that, and this pharmaceutical strategy gives an opening to that, but we need to keep on pushing. Negotiations have just started in Parliament. They're ongoing as well in the Council of Ministers. And now we need to find which way we'll go, both in Council and in Parliament, and then find the final ending. I heard with interest the previous panel and also some others before. Not all politicians are stupid. There are many, but let's have hope. And actually, we can change that. We can vote for the non-stupid politicians, actually.
Yeah, so I just want to emphasize that this pharma revision is really something major that is happening. The last time the rules were reviewed 20 years ago, so it's a once-a-generation opportunity, and it will have significant consequences both in Europe and also globally for decades through free trade agreements. So it's very major file. Now, so just to echo what Cyrus was saying, so we have this kind of EU legislative superstructure and single market, and we have this mechanism for regulatory approval of new drugs, which is centralized. However, then there are all the diverging healthcare systems underneath, and pricing, the reimbursement, and ultimately access decisions are done member state by member state. They have competences, and this is creating huge access inequities. You mentioned a smaller country, Malta. I am from Poland. It's a big country, but we still have to wait 2 more years as compared to our neighbor, Germany, to see a new treatment reaching patients. And some of these treatments we will not see at all. So these are the kind of pharma decisions. So the pharma revision is there to change it. On one hand, the ambition is to kind of normalize access across the EU. And the second goal, as you mentioned, Cyrus, is stimulating innovation in the area of high unmet needs. And PAREA is currently finalizing our position statement for the pharma package, and we'll be making the case, kind of unmasking a blind spot in the revision, because the revision is thinking about incentivizing some areas. Well, first of all, areas like pediatric medicines or orphan designations, rare diseases, they were incentivized by the Commission for about 2 decades now. Now the Commission wants to incentivize antimicrobials, so antibiotics, encourage the companies to develop these because this is an unmet need. But what about mental health, where the OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, estimates that 1 in 2 people during their lifetime will have a mental health condition. World Economic Forum, in their global risk reports, is saying that mental health deterioration poses severe, significant threats to societies and economies. We have huge treatment gaps. We know that the current treatments are largely ineffective. Last year, European Medicines Agency approved 89 medicines. 0 were for mental health conditions. And so the last 30 years, we haven't really seen any true innovation in the mental health area. We have around 30 antidepressants, 20 antipsychotics, and maybe another dozen of mood stabilizers and ADHD treatments. And the vast majority of them, all that has been done in the last few decades is just tweaking their safety profiles. So how the Commission is not seeing that mental health is a huge unmet need, and I think only when mental health is prioritized, then we can, in a way, benefit, psychedelics can benefit, and we need incentives. We need big incentives for big pharma, so that, because for now, as we just heard, there is no business model for them. We also need incentives helping smaller companies, helping them with research, giving them EU grants. We need simpler procedures. And the last thing I want to mention, because I think it's important, there was recently a letter released by 5 countries. It's Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Austria, and Ireland. And they are speaking about the need of the needs-driven approach to pharma innovation, where we look at what are real societal needs, not just a return on investment. And what's novel there is that they suggest that the incentives are across the whole life cycle of the medicine. So starting with research, through incentives for R&I, but also incentives at the level of reimbursement. by creating a more predictable reimbursement situation for developers in the future so that they know what to expect. And so I think all this, we really need to insert mental health and novel mental health treatments within this broad discussions that are happening now on high unmet needs in Europe.
Thank you. And we have a couple of minutes left. So my final question, what legal and regulatory challenges face this sector to be scaled up and implemented?
Well, I think the biggest reason for legal obstacles is the UN Convention itself and the Schengen Agreement, unfortunately, because effectively, whatever substance you want to talk about, the transport movement use is somehow restricted because of those two international agreements, which are in various ways included in the European law. So what I believe is that we really need to think about like what is the role of these international documents and whether we shall adhere to them, because currently what we do see is, I think, them to be effectively blocking innovations and damaging, let's say, the opportunities for our citizens to get better healthcare.
Yeah, I agree with Mikula totally. We've been working on these two pieces of international legislation for quite a while, not only for psychedelics, but also for recreational cannabis, for instance, or medical cannabis. So there is that hurdle that we face. But apart from that, I would still go on to the fact that we still have, in the European Union at least, 27 different markets when it comes to pharmaceuticals rather than one. And that makes it very difficult to have investment, first of all, because those investing need to go through 27 different legislative frameworks that are there's one above them, but then there are 27 different ones, 27 different markets that they need to actually get approval for, etc. So that is something that needs to be addressed, and hopefully will start being addressed by the current legislation being proposed. Ultimately, such the fragmentation of the European market leads also to exclusivity. So certain medicinals are exclusive to certain patients only across the European Union, and that is unacceptable. When we're speaking of medical care, we're not speaking of something which should be exclusive, like, I don't know, going out here in Regent Street and buying a handbag from Gucci, which costs a lot and only a few can actually buy it. We're speaking of something which is needed by patients for them to feel better. So this should be their right to have. And if it is their right to have, then we should make sure that there's a market that removes any exclusivity, makes it widely accessible, and that would also lead for it to be more affordable. Because if there's a bigger market, let's say, automatically, economically, it would be more affordable and more reachable to everyone.
Yeah, so again, echoing, I think a kind of a non-psychedelic specific regulatory challenge is indeed the fragmentation and the health technology assessment processes where country by country has their own methodologies, and it's just it's a mess. Luckily, the European Union is now working on harmonizing this through the central HTA process, which is a long kind of journey, but there is a light in the tunnel at the end of the tunnel. And the other, so I just want to say I'm speaking from the PAREA perspective, which is we look at the future prescription use of psychedelics within clinical context. So from this perspective, one additional barrier is I also want to mention that the situation is very different than 10, 20 years ago, where regulators didn't want to hear about clinical trials. Now, thanks to wonderful science, thanks to MEPs, the door is open. But the one challenge I see is the combination therapy, because as we know, EMA, FDA, they don't regulate clinical protocols, but only the drug. So what we will need is an expert consensus on standards of care, on things like the treatment protocols, standards for the training of the therapists, ethical guidelines, also data collection protocols. So what we need here is this expert consensus bringing together professional organizations that already have well-established safeguards, like psychologists, psychiatrists, and then bringing also drug developers who have their own protocols, bringing patient organizations and the whole community, and coming up with the standards that then would make it much easier for the regulators to approve these treatments.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for joining us.